Cremation always seemed like a good idea. I never want to be buried in a box, underground, hidden from the world I've come to know and love. It always seemed so sad to me, even as I sit here breathing, legs firmly on solid ground. I feel an immense sadness for those who passed and lay under a mountain of rubble. Their hands would forever be clasped together, fingers interwoven in a self-comforting gesture, as the earth takes its sweet time taking back what rightfully belonged to it. At least with cremation, you wouldn't be as lonely. In a few hours, your body would be incinerated, becoming nothing more than a pile of smoldering fertilizer, placed in an urn, scattered in a garden, on a mountaintop. I don't care, as long as you never put me in that damn box. But that was before I walked past the crematory and caught a whiff of what was emanating from its smoking metallic pillars. It took a second to realize what I was looking at. I read the letters on the building and returned to the whirling smog coming from the stacks. But for some reason, my mind refused to make the connection, and I found myself stopping on the street corner. I followed the smoke up, past its changing hues that went from black to white, from white to nothing, vanishing like a ghost, mixing with the clouds, drifting into obscurity. When I looked back at the building's lettering, I read aloud, "Crematory." Clarity rushed into my mind and the horrific thought cemented into my brain, forever engraving in my memory. I scrunched my nose and tried keeping the smoke. No, the person out of my body. But it was too late. Their cooking flesh had already made its way inside, and I felt immense guilt at the first thought that came into my head. Even the voice in my head refused to give the thought a stage, but my mouth started watering, salivating. I couldn't help it. It's like your body knows the taste of something by pure smell alone. The air was ripe with the odor of unseasoned meat. I snapped out of my transfixion with the chimney and shook away my train of thought. But I found myself looking over my shoulder, above the trees, the smokestack still visible from blocks away. I swallowed what I thought was anxiety. If only it were. A few days passed, and I couldn't get the smell out of my mind. Maybe it was just a one-off? I thought to myself. There was no way human flesh could smell that good. I took another walk that evening, lying to myself, saying that I was not going on this little escapade to smell the death coming from that little red brick building. I even thought about only walking a few blocks away, just close enough to see the smoke wave its final goodbye. But when I couldn't smell anything, I justified that a bit closer wouldn't hurt. I repeated this cycle until a familiar faint odor grabbed hold of me. I couldn't stop myself from walking, getting closer to the crematory until I stood on the same street corner as the first day I'd smelled it. The pure aroma of untampered meat. It smelled better than the first time I'd walked past. My stomach growled as I imagined the meat sizzling in the flame, the fat tissue crackling in the heat, the way the meat would melt in your mouth as you ripped a chunk from bone, mashing it between your teeth, the satisfying warmth as it hit the bottom of your stomach. I stood on that corner for what felt like minutes, but in reality, it was hours. Long enough for the smoke to stop and only the rippling shimmer of the chimney's heat to be seen. I hate to say it, but I was disappointed. It was the best thing to ever hit my nose, and I needed more. That night, I looked up the crematory's website. Call it curiosity, but I found the funeral home that the crematory was associated with. Directly on the home page was a list of people who had recently passed and were under the care of the funeral home. Like all funeral homes, they detailed information about the person's funeral service, viewing, and burial. Those who were cremated did not have a burial service detailed in their description. By pure process of elimination, I found 2 people who were cremated. A man in his 80s and another in his 40s. The old man had died a few days before the younger man, and his service was just 2 days prior to that first day the smell caught my fascination. I knew it. I knew it was him. He was the one that smelled so delicious. The second man was heavyset. In his picture, mounds of flesh spilled over his beltline, cheeks plump with moisture. The extra fat had given his scent a hint of gristle, and it was delightful. His meat must have been so marbled, dripping, oozing with that mouth-watering saltiness of lard. I swallowed hard, and guilt reared its ugly head a second time. I smashed the laptop shut and my palms covered my face. What the hell is wrong with me? I thought. I needed to get over this obsession with the smell, so I did my research. It turns out that the closest thing to human meat, in terms of smell and taste, is pork. I was so excited when I got home from the butcher shop, trudging in with bags of pork chops, pork rinds, ears, and feet. I was finally going to scratch the itch that had been tormenting me for weeks. I prepped the meat, some seasoned, others plain. Cookbooks on the counter, trying to surmise the best way to prevent myself from bashing my head against the wall if this didn't go well. I oiled the skillet and lay the meat in the pan. It greeted me with a festering crackle that filled me with anticipation. White smoke wafted off the meat and filled the air with disappointment. The smell was similar, but not the same. It was different, less pure. My face soured even more when I took the first bite. It didn't taste like what I'd imagined. It was as if I could taste the lie, like imitation crab meat when compared to the real deal. I was filled with rage. The way my hand changed from a rosy tinge to white-knuckled rage caught my attention, and my grip loosened. The blood rushed back into my fingers, and an idea popped into my head. I lifted my hand, studying the plump flesh of my pinky. It was skinny, but just meaty enough for me to get a taste of what I needed. The bone wasn't too thick. It would hurt like hell when I snapped through it, but it would be worth it in the end. I grabbed the meat cleaver and placed my hand on the chopping block. I measured the trajectory of the blade and lifted it above my head. I hesitated, letting the blade linger in the air. I was shaking, my heart thudding, but not with fear, with excitement. I brought the cleaver down with all my might. Swishing through the air, It met the chopping block with a hard thud. There was little resistance as it sliced through. My pinky was squirming on the wood like a half-dead insect pleading for death, the nerves coursing through it, firing one last time. It curled and unfurled on a crimson backdrop until it finally died. My hand was on fire, but the adrenaline numbed the pain. I pinched the digit between my thumb and index finger and tossed it into the pan. The skin squealed as the outside crispened. The blood, dripping off the open end, bubbled on the skillet. The smell rose from the pan and into my nose. It smelled delightful. The same smell that was wafting from the crematory's chimneys was now filling my kitchen. It was pure ecstasy. When I flipped it, the underside was nice and charred, the skin crispy and blackened, but I made sure to keep the inside nice and pink. Such a small chunk only took a few minutes to cook, and all the while I was holding back a mouthful of dribble. When I was satisfied, I lifted the finger, teasing it inches from my mouth. My plan was to savor the taste, to make it last, since this meat was so rare to come by. But I was overtaken by an animalistic urge and threw the thing in my mouth. As my jaw crushed through, the bone snapped and a spurt of gooey goodness shot out of the flayed end. My skin pimpled with euphoria. It tasted amazing. I tasted amazing. I had finally scratched the itch. I was satisfied, for a time anyway. I still venture out to that same street corner, though now I do it from the comforts of a wheelchair. My views on cremation have not changed, but I fear that there is going to be very little for them to cremate.